Welcome to the Mystic-Skeptic radio show and podcast, the program in which we ask the tough questions and explore different alternatives to today's pressing issues, theories, or enigmas. Our show is devoted to the exploration of all things mystical, philosophical, scientific, political, conspiratorial, and cosmic. Join us in an exploration of the Mystic-Skeptic mind space. In this week's show, our guest is Joe Balog. He is our correspondent for religious spiritual affairs so far, and I needed someone to bounce this topic off, and I think he's the perfect person. He has had a long journey in Christianity, and now he's involved with the Antiochian Orthodox Church. So him being part of a traditional community and me studying the Bible from a traditional perspective as well as from a scholarly perspective, we're going to break down the issues with what is really popular now on YouTube. It's called Astrotheology. And I've been reading this book. It's called Reversing Hermon. It was sent by one of the guests on my show. He's been on 2 shows so far. His name is Dr. Michael Heiser. And he even throws astrotheology in this book. And I was flabbergasted when I started reading what he was saying, because he started off with the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is a controversial book. It's not canonized or part of the Bible, but it's part of those books that were written between the Old Testament and the New Testament in Western thought. So he says that he can explain a lot of stuff in the New Testament based on the book of Enoch, and then he throws astrotheology. So for us to even delve into astrotheology, and you can go on YouTube and find a lot of videos on it, how it's connected to the Bible. So in page 58 of this book, he's trying to connect astrotheology to the book of Revelation. And he just doesn't happen to know that the book of Revelation is one of my favorite books to not only try to interpret and understand from the mind of people of that time, but to also break down in the sense of apocalyptic literature and how it's been so misunderstood and so disconnected from its time period that people have come up with all kinds of ridiculous and crazy interpretations. So I actually have taken notes from another book that interprets the book of Revelation from a Jewish perspective. It's called the Annotated Jewish New Testament. And we're going to compare what he says to that book and we're going to see which one makes more sense based on what we know of apocalyptic literature of that time. But astrotheology is a new thing that was made up, I don't know, in the last 50 years. And it's this idea that you can find anything in the stars. And anybody that talks to me about astrology is going to know that I am very negative towards astrology because it comes from a mythological mindset. So if you think the Bible is away from modern man's mentality, mythology is even worse and more fantastical. So to try to mix them together and to say that you can pinpoint to the life of Jesus through it, it just seems like almost blasphemous, especially since one of the first American preachers that brought up astrotheology was James Kennedy, and he's known for being a word of faith crazy preacher who's always misinterpreting the Bible and saying all kinds of wild things. So for this to claim to be scholarly is very disturbing. So let's get on it. So page 58, Revelation 12 as astral prophecy. Nearly all scholars have tried to correlate the birth of the Messiah with astronomy as they share a crucial oversight. They start with the description of the star of Bethlehem in Matthew 2. This is a fatal flaw, one that not only overlooks Paul's astro-theological use of Psalm 19, but one that cuts off any chance of understanding how first-century Jews could have connected the birth of Jesus with the sin of the Watchers. This is a very loaded thing, but in the book of Enoch, it says that the demons, this is where one of the church fathers came up with the whole story about the rebellion of Satan, that they say that it was a group of angels who fell in love with women. They came down and they had carnal connection with them, and they brought about the sin of the Watchers of the Nephilim. And these were men who were half demon, half human. To me, that is super problematic because now you have 2 different realms, one that is spiritual and one that is physical, coming together. he's trying to connect that to the birth of Jesus. So there's a lot of problems to begin with. But now he's saying that the Apostle Paul, when he said in I think in Romans, said that the heavens declare the work of God, or the gospel is in the stars, or something like that. And now he's trying to make a whole theology related to that. And he was just saying that philosophically speaking, the story of redemption came, it was all around us. So now they take one passage and they just run with it. So let's look at that. He keeps going. I believe that the celestial messaging Paul had in mind in Romans 10:18 can be found in Revelation 12:1-7. This passage has several items that, if taken at face value, are astronomical signs associated with the birth of the Messiah. Considering the language of Revelation 12:1-7 in this way produces a real-time date for the birth of Jesus, a date that is laden with symbolism that first century Jews would have understood as connecting the messianic birth to the sin of the watchers. Revelation 12:1-7 reads as follows. It's quoting this biblical passage. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. And the quote ends there from Revelation. Going back to Michael Heiser's premise, it is quite clear that the sign in the heavens, where John is specifically looking at Revelation 12:1, are indisputably astronomical, sun, moon, and stars. The specific signs require attention. So, Joe, I know that you've studied the Bible with Francisco, was a Jesuit priest, and then now with the Antiochian. Are you guys still studying the Bible, or is it just following the passage of the week? Do you have like an Orthodox Bible with Orthodox interpretation of these passages, or is it just a basic understanding that it relates to Mary and Jesus and the stars, is like that she's been glorified from what you know?
The religious order that I was with in Mexico was rooted in the Dominican order and the Benedictines, so it was a mix. And the Antiochian church that I attend does have Bible study pretty much every Sunday, and we go through different passages, or someone who reads them out and then gets feedback from the community on what everybody thinks about it, or what the author's trying to say, what their interpretation is, and then that gets backed up with what the Orthodox Church has taught over time, or what a church father said, or what a saint said. And I do have an Orthodox Bible, and there are footnotes, and I'm trying to find, what chapter was that again?
So we're in chapter 12. That is the most well-known passage, where it depicts the woman kind of like the Virgin Guadalupe painting, where she's surrounded by stars and clothed in the sun and standing on the moon.
Yes. So, you want me to read what the footnotes are here?
Sure.
Starting in verse 1, it says, these verses begin an extensive parenthesis in the center of Revelation. So now a great sign appeared in heaven. and dealing with the conflict between the church and the powers of evil. So that's the theme for, I guess, for 12:1 through 12:14. More specifically, the great sign in heaven, the woman is either the Theotokos or the Theotokos or true Israel. The church, so it could be one of the three. So the great sign in heaven, the woman is either the Theotokos or true Israel, the church. Orthodoxy sees the Theotokos as a perfect symbol of Israel and the church. She is the antithesis of the harlot of chapter 17, for she is a radiant bride. There's some reference to something out there, adorned with splendor. The 12 stars indicate the 12 tribes. So her head, a garland of 12 stars. The 12 stars indicate the 12 tribes and possibly the 12 apostles. And the moon under her feet. So now we're skipping ahead. Or no, we're going backwards actually to verse 1 again. So a woman clothed with the sun with the moon under her feet. And the footnote is, and the moon under her feet symbolizes her preeminent role over creation. Her birth giving a, quote, male child from verse 5 is that of the Messiah. And she bears other offspring as well in 12:17. So jumping ahead to 12:17, that's way ahead. As well, a likely reference to the church. There's more here about the dragon too, but that's pretty obvious if you're at all familiar with this passage. So
traditional Christianity, and we're talking about the Orthodox Church, would see the woman as the mother of God. That's what Theotokos means, the Virgin Mary. But she's also symbolic of Israel as the bride of God, or the church as the bride of Christ. And then, the child is Jesus, and then fighting the forces of evil, trying to destroy the church. So that's a traditional interpretation. Dr. Heiser starts talking about the dragon is Hydra, if you look at the constellations, and then the woman is Virgo, and then the lion, like there's no lion in the story. The lion is mentioned later next to the lamb or something. So he starts making all these weird associations, and that's my problem. If you ever studied astrology as a kid or growing up, you find out that astrology is connected to the movement of the stars, and the stars have moved since back then. So for me, anybody who reads their astronomical thing and tries to get information from it, it's just a made-up thing. It's like pop psychology. And then, but if you try to connect this system as the mythological system to biblical teachings of that time, whoever wrote the book of Revelation wasn't thinking in astrological terms, because they were a first century Jew. And there is the evidence that Dr. Heiser uses to try to integrate mythology into this is that if you find a lot of in excavations they've done in the Holy Land, they'll find an old ancient synagogue, and they'll see a zodiac sign somewhere in their mosaics. As far as I know, it seems like they're older synagogues, like from the 2nd century. And even so, for Jews, astronomy is used as one of the many sciences. Like, it's not completely based in mythology. It's based on the system that everybody was using. So even there's one prayer book that I have that has those zodiac signs, but is related to the calendar. So they were using the Greek calendar that had the zodiac signs, the 12 months. And that's like, in the video that we both looked at before doing the show, they try to say that 12 signs are connected to the 12 tribes, and that each animal and the 4 beasts and this and that, all that stuff is completely made up. He tries to do that here with saying that Hydra is not, the dragon is not really Hydra, it's actually Scorpio, but the Scorpio mixed with some other thing and up in the sky. And then he goes into the lion, and then he goes into the date of the birth of Jesus related to the month when the Magi showed up, and it's like it's a lot of wishful thinking, because in the research that I've done, the real historical connection between the image of the woman and the dragon and the child is more connected to the story of Leto and Apollo, that they were being chased by Python, and this is part of Greek mythology. So we know that in biblical literature, there's often appropriation of another religion or cultural systems ideas, and then it be reworked for the sake of their narrative. And I know it sounds kind of sacrilegious, but if you look at the story of the creation of the world, the Israelites took different myths from the Babylonians and the Canaanites and other people, and they took things that they connected with, and then they reworked them to convey a different message. So to a lot of people, be like, well, that's crazy. This is divine stuff. How can you say it was reworked myths from other worlds or world views? It's just that in that time there was very strong ideas. So the idea of a void where monsters and things came out, that was very popular among the Near Eastern religions. The biblical writers saw that void as the waters before the Spirit of God hovered over it and brought to life all the creatures. So it saw it as a redemptive act or a holy act, as compared to the other ones where they were afraid of the darkness and afraid of the void, and there was all these evil forces in it. So if someone was familiar with Greek mythology or with the Roman thought patterns of that time, and they're trying to convey this message or this prophetic idea of the birth of the Messiah, they could have borrowed ideas from the Greeks, especially if they're sending this letter or this prophetic uttering throughout the Roman Empire. And they said, well, you've heard the story of Apollo being chased by Python when he was with his wife Leto. Actually, there's a similar concept in the idea that we're warring against the evil forces of Hasatan, who's the accuser, or there's a different name that is used for Satan in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he's doing a similar thing. He's trying to destroy the work of God through the birth of the Messiah, and there's the aspect of protecting the offspring, and you can see it as a metaphor, like the Messiah is coming out of Israel, that is the woman, because a lot of Protestant scholars would say that the 12 stars are the 12 tribes, but they're actually the 12 brothers that make up the family of Joseph, because Joseph had a vision or a dream where he was the son and the stars were bowing down to him. So Joseph is a symbol of Messiah ben Joseph, that is the suffering servant that Christians believe in as the precursor of the Messiah. So there is a messianic perspective that is connected to that, apart from the idea of a virgin birth, apart from the idea of a woman representing Israel, the church. There's the idea of the people of Israel being the ancestors of the Messiah. But to start throwing in astrology and stuff like that, it just seems ludicrous. And he has other scholars, and this is a problem with evangelical scholars. I can't really trust an evangelical scholar because they're evangelicals and they're scholars at the same time. It's like there are Orthodox priests who are scholarly, and they'll speak and they say, well, you can look at the gospel narratives as holy and revelation based, but you also look at it historically as how they developed. You say, well, how can someone be an Orthodox priest and a scholar at the same time? Because they're able to speak to two different types of audiences. When they speak in church, they speak in like the official traditional perspective. When they speak to their students, they help them think critically. What you see in a book like this is that it's an evangelical track to try to prove that Jesus was born in a certain date, and it just falls flat to me as propaganda. So let me read you guys how he comes up with September 11th, from the third year of the Common Era. as not only a Jewish holiday, but the birth of Jesus, and also the same day of Noah's flood. So now we're on page 65 of Reversing Hermon. Quote, the astronomical context of John's description of what we saw in the heavens in Revelation 12 puts the birth of Jesus on September 11, 3 BC as impressive as the correlation of the astronomical events with the description of Revelation 12 is. There are even more points of correlation that bear directly on the astrotheology being communicated. The literary context of Revelation 12 is of relevance here. Immediately preceding Revelation 12, John describes the heavenly appearance of the temple and the Ark of the Covenant. That's Revelation 11:19. The Ark was the central symbol of God's presence in Israel. The birth of the child, Jesus, in Revelation 12:1-7, was John's way of saying that the presence of God had indeed returned to earth in the form of his child, the Messiah. New Testament scholar Greg Beale notes the significance of the juxtaposition by John. Quote, a trumpet was blown on Tishri 1, which in the rabbinic period came to be viewed as the beginning of the new year. God's eschatological judgment of all people was expected to fall on this day. The New Year trumpet also proclaimed hope in the ongoing and ultimate kingship of God, in God's judgment and reward according to the people's deeds and Israel's final restoration. So what he's doing is he's going back on the Jewish calendar all the way to the third year of the Common Era, and he's saying that there's a connection between the Feast of Trumpets, that is usually Yom Teruah in the Jewish calendar, and the birth of Jesus, because theologically, God is calling out the world and sending his son as the Messiah. But it's like, seems like it's inserted into this idea. It's like they're trying to say that the Magi didn't just go up to Jerusalem whenever, that they were looking at the stars and they knew Greek mythology, and that somehow they connected the lion, Leo, and Virgo, and Jupiter, and Hydra, and they saw everything already happening, and they were like, we have to go to Jerusalem. We have to go to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is actually an hour from Jerusalem walking or whatever. And they made it over there, and they made it on the Feast of Trumpets. And on 65 in the middle, it says, Jupiter is also important because it's the best explanation for the star, whose movement was tracked by the Magi. Jupiter is well known to retrograde motion, the appearance of movement back and forth in the night sky. Jupiter's first conjunction with Regulus began on September 14 from the year 3rd before the Common Era, and continued through September 11, 3 before the Common Era. On December 1st, 3 before the Common Era, Jupiter stopped its normal course through the fixed stars and began its annual retrogradation on backward motion. In doing so, it was once again headed towards the star Regulus. Then on February 17 of the second year before Christ, the two were reunited. Jupiter continued on its motion, still in retrogression, another 40 days, and then it reverted to its normal motion through the stars. The timing is right as the Magi embark on the journey a year or so after Jesus was actually born. So this was before Christ. I'm getting confused because they're talking about the birth of Jesus before the birth of Christ, and because they're using the known calendar. So they're saying that in the year 30 is when Jesus died, and that's the most common perspective, that he lived 33 years. But it's like, again, they already like made up their mind, and now they're trying to retrofit everything to fit. So I don't know if you've noticed that. I know, Joe, that you had involvement with Protestants for a little bit. Do you think that a lot of the problems with people misunderstanding Christianity or losing interest in Christianity is the kind of tactics they use and the kind of disingenuous religious like propaganda they use, that they think that they're helping the case and they're actually creating more doubts and more problems with people?
That's a question. I think, speaking from my own experience with a limited set of people and a limited view that I have, and I don't want to offend anybody. However, to speak honestly, it was my experience in a smaller church that's part of a network of churches that was started by one man as a break-off group from another Protestant denomination, that he believed that he had found insights, so to speak, from scripture that no one else did yet, and then began to have a whole program that he outlined for people that would set them on the right path. And I think that kind of leadership, in the sense of being a prophet of a kind that has found something totally new that no one else has, is dangerous, because it insinuates that there's nothing true that came before it, and now everything after this person, whose mouth whose mouth and whose program, writings, Bible studies, works of speeches and procedures, it assumes that is all now. So that nuance is the same as truth. And the experience that I had with it was, and I remember thinking this too, and I think I told you this before, was that when I first sort of started going to their Bible studies, I had a feeling that this was more like signing up to get a car than it was about getting to know, who God is, how to live in community, how to be a healthy, normal, how to be a person. It was more like joining an exclusive club that you had to pay your dues and be part of this corporation. It's more like a business than it was a church per se. There was aspects of it that were wonderful, like getting to know people that were outside of my normal traditional faith. I was Roman Catholic at the time, so that was a big plus of like getting to see other people's perspectives, getting to mix with people of another ethnicity as me, which that was prime time because I was in Chicago. So it was like, this is a great way to meet people and to network and to learn about a different perspective, and to learn within the Christian sphere what Protestants really teach and how they live. Because while I had roommates in college that were Protestant and people that I knew, I didn't go to church with them. I didn't pray with them. I prayed with them sometimes, but I didn't worship with them, because that's what it ultimately comes down to, I think, is what are you doing on Sunday? And that was a big difference. And so I think that, to go back to your question, it's just the word, to me, nuance, and that's a fancy word to say like this new thing that we're going to make, this new form of Christianity is going to be so so new and so better and so different. And it's that, I think, what I hear from other people too is that it's a problem within community in general. Every time you go to create something that's totally new and you think you're the only one doing it, it can very much lead you down the wrong path. So,
well, it's just very selectively, Dr. Heiser uses Jewish interpretation of the Bible to make his case. So I was trying to see this part about Noah and Jesus and how is it connected. Jesus talked about the generation being as wicked as the time of Noah, and then the issue of the watchers. One of the reasons that God sent the flood is because the men the offspring of the men and the women, the sons of man and the daughters of the sons of man and the sons of God intermingled, was that the generation became wicked. So then now he's saying that it is known in Jewish tradition that Noah was born on the first day of Tishri, and that's when he's claiming that it's the Feast of Trumpets, and then when Jesus was born, because if you follow the calendar and the Jupiter and all that, so it's like, okay, fine, but it just seems like too much. Like, people could say, okay, Jesus was born sometime back then live accordingly. Like, it's funny that one of the first shows that we did this year, we were talking about Christmas, and I cut it out because I didn't want people to be offended. But we're talking about how we had a Protestant young man who's an apologist, and he was saying about how wonderful Christmas is and stuff like that. And then at the same time, he was saying that he connects a lot with first century Judaism and the way that Jesus' disciples were and stuff like that. Well, according to this, Jesus wasn't born on Christmas Day. Jesus was born 3 months before, September, actually like 4 or 5 months before. So you should change your calendar. If this is true, if this is a huge revelation that the book is not even about when Jesus was born. The book was about the evil sons, demonic sons of the demons. Now he's talking about, boom, case closed, knocked it out of the park. I know when Jesus was born. So if you have that type of revelation to show the whole world, then the whole Christian calendar would be thrown out, because a lot of the Hebrew roots people that might follow him would say that December 25th is not the birth of Jesus. That is the equinox that the pagans celebrated. So why would you want to, the solstice, why would you want to celebrate the birth of Jesus on the solstice when they used to worship Apollo? And then it gets too confusing, and that's where he's not to reveal too much, but mention watching a video where they try to connect all the different spiritual men, and saying that Apollo, Jesus, Osiris, all these different deities, they all come from the same story and the same perspective. So you run into problems regarding how the calendar came about. Now he's saying, I have the perfect biblical calendar of birth of Jesus. It's actually during the Feast of Trumpets that is part of the Jewish calendar. There's a biblical calendar given by Moses. Let's all get on board. And the guy that we were talking to, he was talking about how wonderful first century Judaism was. And I'm like, well, why do you go to church on Sunday? You should go to synagogue on Saturday. So it's just like all these like inconsistencies. And that's the problem. It's like they come up with these great ideas, but then they don't follow through. So it's like, what's the point? If you're proving to me that Jesus was born that day because the Magi and stuff like that, okay, fine. But is there anything extra? Like, one of the aspects that this book really bothered me about is what I was telling you guys about in the beginning, mixing the spiritual realm with the human realm. Maybe look up Genesis chapter 3 in your Orthodox Bible to see what it says about the Watchers. Because again, you can make all kinds of weird correlations, and that's what the YouTube video about the Book of Revelation and the Astrotheology was doing. He was saying, there's 4 coordinates, and there's 4 beasts, and there's 6 wings, and 6 angels, and so many angels, and there's 24 elders, and there's this and that from other religions, and it was just like on and on and on and on. And it's what we call in our show parallelomania, where everything is connected to something else. So there's stories of Zeus turning into a bull and sleeping with a woman. Now you got a demon coming, and I guess he became a man, and then he slept with the woman, and the kid became a giant. So why believe the Bible if you have the same kind of crazy stories somewhere else? So let's see what our friends in the Orthodox Church that has an ancient tradition of interpretation say about the sin of the sons of God getting involved with the daughters of men.
We're in chapter 3.
Let me find it because This is the controversial passage. So Genesis, so the Genesis account is Genesis 6, 1 through 4, actually.
6, 1 through 4. Oh. Well, there's a footnote here for 6:3, which I can read. So the footnote says, well, let's read the passage real quick. Then the Lord God said, "My spirit shall not remain with these people forever, for they are flesh. So their days shall be 120 years." So real quick though, because before that, so when the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, they took wives for themselves of all they chose. Then the Lord God said, "My spirit shall not remain with these people forever, for they are flesh. So their days shall be 120 years. Now there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown." In the 6:3 says that in his disobedience and expulsion from paradise, man lost the grace of the Holy Spirit. From the passage, "My spirit shall not remain." Nevertheless, his grace was always available to man, but man continually refused it. From the passage, "For they are flesh." So God gave them a grace period of, from the passage, 120 years to come to repentance.
Okay, so let's think about that. So one of the problems that come up is this idea of demons, because demons not only possess people, but they have something that angels are not supposed to have, is free will. So how can an angel who is completely devoted to God turn on God unless he allowed it? Because in theology, the idea is angels have no will. Humans have will. God has a will, but angels are servants, and they are the perfect servant because they're like robots. Like they just, all they do is worship God and follow his decrees. So now you have a group that was given the chance to rebel, and then they come down and they start doing the one thing that in the Bible talks about all the time, is sexual immorality. So instead of thinking about giants and intercourse between demons and humans, people need to think about the moral of the story is sexual immorality is forbidden, and it's an abomination that creates monstrous creatures. So it might have something to do with inbreeding. It might have something to do with unacceptable behavior. It might have something to do with paganized, the daughters of men were holy women, and they became involved with men who were worshiping idols or non fake deities, false gods. That's the typical interpretation. If you want to go the giant route, you can go all kinds of different routes. There's some midrashim that talk about Adam. Before Eve was born, there was a woman named Lilith. And this is a mythical story, but she actually comes up in some of the stories about demons. And Lilith seduces Adam, and he has multiple children with her. So if you want to go the mystical route with demonic stuff, you can come up with all kinds of different alternative stories regarding Lilith, but no one with a rational perspective would ever take that seriously, because then you have to start thinking about incubus and succubus and all these other type of demons that are making people lust and fall into inappropriate relationships. So this passage is an ancient way of giving someone a didactic fear of being involved with people who are foreign to their spiritual perspective. Does it say anything about that other than they lost access to eternal life and they were given the grace period of 120 years to choose the right path? but does it talk about the giants at all in the Orthodox Bible? In the notes?
I'm not seeing anything here.
So the Orthodox didn't even want to talk about the subject because they knew it was weird. And the issue is that if you go into the life of Jesus and his interaction with demons, the demons act very, they know who he is and they're very upset. And then he starts like arguing with them and then they run away or something. So there's this idea that demons are like the base, like natural passions of people. So if you have children of demons, that would be that a human can be so in, like seduced or put in the wrong direction that now even their children are wicked. Like so it's weird because like the daughters of men are humans who are still innocent, and then they're being brought in. In Jewish tradition, it talks about the Rasha or the Hara, that is like the negative inclination. So now you have this like destructive force that is coming through, and then it becomes the wicked generation. So again, they're trying to mysticize. I don't even know if this is a word. Make mystical the experiences. So they're having misgivings. They're having problems with people being less than favorable, and they're making it mystical. They're making it spiritual. So it's a spiritual battle that people are fighting. And then when Jesus is fighting the demons, it's a spiritual battle that he's doing in front of other people, and then the demons can possess people. So maybe it's talking really, as we've talked in the many shows in the past, it's talking about some type of demon possession that leads people to being sexually impure, because a lot of the demons have that the lust. If you look at the life of saints go live in a mountain or in a cave to stay away from the passions, and one of them is lust, and then the demons come and you try to bother them or make them sin or whatever. So it's like an ongoing battle that people have. So if you don't understand demonology, you're going to start coming up with stories about giants, and a giant can mean many things. Even in his book, he says that they're giborim, they're mighty men. So a mighty person is not the same as a giant. A giant is someone who's taller, stronger, or whatever. They're saying that someone who's powerful. So again, maybe it's metaphorical and they're seeing it. So is there room for metaphorical interpretations of the Bible in Orthodox theology? Or are they wooden literalists like a lot of evangelicals from what you've seen?
From what I have seen, there I don't know, because I can't speak for all of Orthodoxy, you know. That's the but from what I've seen, is there room for metaphor? Yeah, you know, there was one thing I was reading the other day when I was reading the Psalms, and was talking about God's one of the Psalms was talking about like God's anger, something like that, God's some emotion that was attached to God. And I remember the footnote was saying that that's a metaphor because God, as God, doesn't have emotion. So that there's an example.
Let's talk about that, because that is also, it says God was angry and he told Noah, get in the boat and I'm going to send the flood and destroy my creation. Being displeased and being angry can be the same thing. But if you take an Aristotelian perspective on God, that he's an unmovable God, then he wouldn't be upset. He would be like, whatever. They're like little ants. They're acting a fool, whatever. But if you take a biblical, and we would say rabbinic or traditional Christian perspective of God, God is a person. God is not a detached clockmaker. God is actually someone that has will, an emotion, and a mind. So he's able to feel. Like, that's why we can connect with the biblical God, because he has that empathy and connection with humanity that he created, and we're made in his image. So this idea of God being upset could be a metaphor that he's displeased, that he's disappointed. But then how can you disappoint God? Well, it's a God who's they say that we're making God in our own image, that we're making him human, and that he has like he's temperamental. But wouldn't you think that a loving father would have the desire for the best? And that's the difference between a detached God that could care less, or a God who actually cares, is that he wants the best, and when the best doesn't happen, he suffers. So it's a suffering God in the sense of he wants things to be better, and he's a co-creator that he can work with humans to make the place better. So it says that he wiped out the Nephilim, or the evil men who were giants, and there was still some left. And when they went into Canaan, there was some hanging around. So, but again, if it's a metaphor for evil, there's always evil people, even if you wipe them out and they come back. So it's just interesting that they're giants because they have to be giants, because they have demons. And it's like, come on, man, like you're giving people very little to connect with. If it's like a Lord of the Rings where you got like half monsters and elves and stuff like that, like, great, but we're talking about like rational people. Like, how are we going to connect with this stuff? How are we going to find meaning in this stuff if you're introducing a completely like other metaphysical like characters? Like, it's already difficult enough to believe that there's beings from a different dimension, like angels, that come in and they become corporeal, and they are part of the life of Abraham and some other prophets, and then you're introducing the idea of God taking human flesh, and now you're going to go back in time and say, well, because God can become human flesh, and demons can become human flesh and have babies. And it's like, whoa, man, like that. Now you just lost me. So and to close this segment of the show, I just want to throw this to you, Joe, and tell me if I'm crazy. So my guest on the show, he's famous not for his books about Jesus and the Watchers. He's famous for his books about aliens. And he said on my show that it's impossible for aliens to exist, or the aliens that people talk about, because they're in a different category. Like, there's people who say that all this stuff, they weren't demons, they were aliens, or God is an alien, or whatever. And he says that it's impossible because there's different categories. An alien has to have a ship, and the ship has to have metal components, and the metal components have to be used in a certain way, has to have propulsion and stuff like that. An angel can appear and disappear without propulsion. An angel can interact and become physical, and I guess an alien can't, or unless they're from the Star Wars planet where everybody's a human. I don't know what he's talking about. But to introduce that a demon can have sex with a woman, then who stops us to say it wasn't a demon, it was an alien? And an alien took a woman into a spaceship, got her pregnant, and then sent her to have a star child. So the moment that you introduce the possibility of beings from two different systems to be able to intermingle, then you have all kinds of possibilities of having the star children who are half human. There's a theory that aliens had some type of interaction with monkeys, and that's where humans came from. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can come up with. So again, once you open the can of worms, that there's two different realms that they can be mixed, and then you have a third hybrid, then there's no ending for that. So I don't think that is necessary. It's impossible in so many ways, and it muds the idea of a theologically coherent perspective, because now you have things that are outside of human experience. And you can say, well, everything in the Bible is out of human experience because there's miracles and there's things, but there are miracles and things that have multiple layers. So the giants getting becoming the children or whatever has no purpose whatsoever. Like, other than saying that there was demons that came and then they hid and then they came back or whatever, there's no point in that. It doesn't help anybody. But if you say, okay, there was a splitting of the Red Sea, and that means that God is with his people and that God can work through nature to bring about a positive outcome or whatever, you can look at it from multiple layers and find something meaningful. But this thing about the giants doesn't help in any way or build anybody up. It just brings confusion and a lot of weirdness into theology, in my perspective. What do you think?
You know, what you're saying is making a lot of sense. It comes, I think that that's true in the sense of what is the point of going about in all these wild theories when you have a lot of foundational beliefs in theology kind of set up for you. Like, there's enough there to work with that going out and creating something new, like saying, like, I wonder what the person was thinking that's like, let's talk about these giants in this new way, because from the perspective of story, they're a very small character, and to inflate them and then derive a whole theology around it, like you said, you almost have to pick, like, if you're going to say this, now you have to say all of these other things just to substantiate your claim that this character is this character and plays this role in the story, when really the more important figures play a much bigger role in the overall story are the ones that are more important. Like who is Abraham? What did he do? Who is Noah? What did he do? And if you are rational, you'd ask, why did he do that? And you follow it along, and you look at the major characters and the prophets and Jesus and St. John. You know, if you're going to talk about the book of Revelation, you have to ask, well, who was St. John and what did he do? And why did he go there? Like, why did he go to Patmos? Well, he was exiled. Like, why was he exiled? Well, he was kicked out of, I don't even remember the story. Like, but he was kicked out, and the Romans booed him out. So now he's off alone, contemplating in the wilderness. So it's like, I think that going off on a tangent about the Nephilim and who they were, and then creating a whole other myriad story, a smaller story that would somehow explain the whole, is kind of, you know, the old saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's what I think.
Well, we're gonna end with that because we already ran for an hour. But thank you again for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's always fun to be the spokesperson for religion in America, for Christianity.
There you go.